Not too long ago, a major name in King James-only circles got himself in minor Twitter trouble. Minor in that one person noticed his fault, and I agreed that it was a fault, for misrepresenting some facts in the King James-only debate. I will not name names because I just cannot say I enjoyed it the last time I named names on this channel. It got me some attention I'm not sure I wanted, the kind of attention that deadly car wrecks on the side of the road get. Not super fun. So, at the risk of missing the clicks I could get if I named names, I'm going to keep this story anonymous. Though you can do the Twitter research if you really want and discover who I'm talking about. I'm telling you, his name is a big one in King James Onlyism. He shared a meme from independentbaptist.com that looks like this. The word told in the KJV was changed to conscripted in the NIV. Which one did you say was easier to read? I've seen this kind of thing countless times before, and I do mean countless. It is one of the most common responses to my basic argument that the Elizabethan English of the King James is now unnecessarily archaic for modern readers. I hear this kind of thing from my King James only brothers all the time. Well, I heard it yesterday. The modern versions contain difficult words too, and often enough they list these words, but they only ever list them. They don't mention the contexts. I, unfortunately, cannot prove that I have seen this countless times before. I can't dredge up all those experiences. I didn't take screenshots of them all. I do have, however, 4 data points that I can point you to. First, leading King James onlyist Sam Gipp listed a bunch of supposedly difficult and archaic words in the NIV in his video series, What's the Big Deal About the King James Version? Among those words were trafficked, odious, bemoan, and paramour, all of which he said were archaic. None of which are actually archaic, no matter. The important thing here is that he didn't supply any contexts. He just listed the words. Second, a King James only pastor that I know did the same with the New King James Version, sending me a list of words that were difficult in the New King James, but whose counterparts were easy in the King James, or so he said. His blog is now defunct. I couldn't find it, but I actually saved the text, and I can show you the screenshot of it here. I, for some reason, remembered this one because it included the strange word jackdaw, going up to another big name, the name I named last time, R.B. Willett, a more sure word. Which Bible can you trust? That's his book. Right after saying that, and I quote, recent evaluation shows the reading level of the King James Bible to be 5th grade, and saying modern versions claim to increase readability when, in reality, they often make readability more difficult. He asks his readers to, quote, consider this list of King James words and their New King James Version counterparts. He points out that evil was changed to adversity in one passage, to calamity in another, to disaster and to catastrophe in various passages. House was changed to habitation, smell to savor, give to gratify, and on to a total of about 30 examples. But Willett never quoted any of the verses in context in the King James or New King James, or expressed any curiosity as to why any of these words were revised in the New King James, which actually in general stuck very close to the King James. Willett felt it was enough for him to just list out the words that have been changed to harder words. Now, I have dug into a number of these specific contexts, and the story is nearly always more complicated than the New King James Version needlessly used a harder word than the King James. The King James, for example, has Amos saying, shall there be evil in a city, and the Lord hath not done it? That is rather theologically awkward, isn't it? So, yes, the New King James uses a harder word than evil here. It uses calamity. The New King James says, if there is calamity in a city, will not the Lord have done it? But there's a reason. The New King James translators were trying to avoid translating the Hebrew word in such a way as to imply that the Lord does evil things. I could repeat this exercise with most, at least, of Willett's list. I won't take the time to do that here. 4th data point. Commenters on my YouTube channel don't usually present lists, but they present 1 or 2 individual instances of difficult words and some comments as proof that my whole case is nonsense. But again, they rarely to never mention the contexts that these words appear in. They don't show any curiosity as to why contemporary translators did what they did. I mean, haven't you seen this particular rhetorical move? It must be effective because I keep seeing it. People share word lists without contexts. A fellow Twitter user actually checked the context, however, on the told versus conscripted meme I showed you, and he found the passage that the meme was talking about. Let's read the passage in the King James Version and in the NIV. Here's the King James. And Solomon told out 70,010 men to bear burdens, and 80,000 to hew in the mountain, and 3,600 to oversee them. That's 2 Chronicles 2:2. So, Solomon told out a bunch of men to bear burdens. What does that mean? I've never heard that phrase, told out. I can pick up from context that it probably means counted, maybe, or hired, or I should say it meant that in 1611, apparently, given the context. But here's the NIV, our English. Solomon conscripted 70,000 men as carriers, and 80,000 as stonecutters in the hills, and 3,600 as foremen over them. Aha! This is clear to me. This is clearly my English. Conscripted isn't a common word, perhaps, but conscription isn't a common thing. We haven't had it in the U.S., at least, since Vietnam. Although I did just the other day read an article in the Wall Street Journal about the military draft, and that's what conscription is. When the Bible talks about difficult or obscure things, like conscription, we can expect that it will be necessary to use difficult or obscure words, like conscripted, to name those things. I have no objection to this. What I do object to is the independentbaptist.com meme that I think misrepresented the case here rather badly. For one, it made the mistake of saying that the King James uses told instead of conscripted. But that just isn't true. The King James Version used the phrasal verb told out instead of the word conscripted. Try that on the meme. Make the meme accurate and it just won't work. People will intuitively know that they don't know this phrasal verb told out. In our English, you can tell on someone. My kids do it all the time. You can tell of someone in our English. It's maybe a little twee, as my favorite linguist John McWhorter says, but the dictionary uses the example sentence, the documentary tells of the rise and fall of the organization. That is instantly recognizable as contemporary English. You can tell off someone, as plenty of my YouTube commenters try to do to me, bless their souls. And something can tell against something else in our English, though this is probably not as common as the others. My dictionary gives this sample sentence. Lack of fitness told against him on his first run of the season. But told out is not available in contemporary English. I searched the 13.8 billion word now corpus composed of untold numbers of web articles, and the phrase told out did not appear even once. So the meme was mistaken because it didn't compare apples to apples. It compared an apple in the NIV to half an apple in the King James, just half of the equivalent phrase. The meme is also mistaken in that it didn't provide context. Sure, by itself, conscripted is more difficult than told. But in that context, even if told out were a common phrase, and it isn't, my gut says that most English speakers who make it to 2 Chronicles in their Bible reading time will know what conscripted means. At the very least, context will get them most of the way they need to go. The meme also treats the King James Version as the default. Did you notice this? As if everything in the NIV is a change made to the original, namely the King James. But that's just not right. The NIV is a fresh translation of the Hebrew and Greek texts of the Bible. The translators all grew up on the King James, as it happens, so there is a sense, and I've read them saying this, that they had to reckon with the King James as they worked. But when different scholars translate Homer's Iliad, as many of them have done, and when they, as they inevitably do, choose slightly different wording, we don't say that the later ones changed the work of the earlier ones. No, it's okay, even expected, that different translators will come up with slightly different ways to translate the same text. That is especially true if the translators are translating for different audiences, as were the King James and NIV translators. The NIV translators were aiming to translate the Hebrew Old Testament and Greek New Testament for people who are now alive. The King James translators were aiming to translate those same texts for people who are now dead. And in a big way, the NIV isn't really using very different wording here. They didn't change the overall meaning of the text. Conscripted just didn't exist in the English of 1611. That verb, as a verb, although it did exist as a noun, I found, did not enter English until 2 centuries after the King James, or so says the Oxford English Dictionary. So the verb conscripted was not available to the King James translators. Told out was the closest equivalent in that day that I'm aware of. Now, it has a different emphasis than conscript. To tell out meant to separate out by counting. This sense is marked as obsolete in the OED, however, just as I expected. The NIV is trying to say basically the same thing in our English that the King James translators were trying to say in theirs, however. So there are at least 3 pretty major mistakes in this silly meme that I'm really going off on. I messaged the Twitter user who did the initial homework on this meme to show that it was mistaken, and he must have been once in the King James Only portion of the IFB as I was. Because he said to me, I sometimes feel betrayed by and angry at my former leaders who I feel lied to me, or at least neglected their responsibility with the truth. I totally sympathize with him, and I think it's important to sort of aim at that second explanation, not that they lied, but that they committed sins of omission if they committed sins at all. They neglected their responsibility with the truth. When it takes just a few moments of Google homework to discover that a given King James only leader posted something misleading or false, and when you've seen this sort of thing numerous times, it is indeed natural to feel that you have been lied to, or again, more charitably, that you've been the victim of someone who just didn't do his homework. I heard a little piece of wisdom in a really great movie once. If there's a waiter who regularly gives the wrong change, but sometimes it goes for him and sometimes it doesn't, he's honest, if a bit bumbling. But if he regularly gives the wrong change and it always goes for his advantage, he's dishonest. I focused in this video on just a few King James Onlyists who have committed a few mistakes. I don't know that I've established a pattern of dishonest change in any of them. What do you think? When does a pattern of mistakes, like failing to do your homework, when does it constitute sin? This is a question I'm glad I don't have to answer ultimately. God will judge. He'll judge me and my brothers. He'll decide whether the divisive falsehoods promoted in countless King James only memes are honest mistakes or whether they are works of the flesh, which, remember, includes not just sins of sexual immorality, but also of division. The works of the flesh are evident, Paul says. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. It is patently ridiculous, openly and obviously wrong to say, as my brother in Christ, R.B. Willett, said, the modern versions claim to increase readability when in reality they often make readability more difficult. That little word often doesn't save him. All of the major modern evangelical English Bible versions are noticeably easier to read than is the archaic Elizabethan English of the King James Version for contemporary readers. Someone who will not say this is shortchanging himself by refusing the experience of reading the Bible in his own English. But I don't want to end with such a negative thought. I want to end with some more positive illustrations and a subsequent encouragement to my King James only brothers. There are some King James Onlyists that I genuinely respect and even like. Can you believe it? Most of them are gentlemen who've had productive private discussions with me, like one I had on the phone yesterday. These are discussions I can't share with you lest I embarrass them. But one of them is one that I've only had a tiny bit of correspondence with, but whose integrity I've seen on display in his writings. His name is Chuck Surratt. I regard Surratt as honest precisely because when he gave the wrong change in one of his books, it actually went against him in some key instances. Surratt was long the academic dean of KJV-Only institution, Ambassador Baptist College. And in one of his books, he worked hard to evaluate the King James Version as compared to the New King James. His methodology was sadly very much mistaken. It was just wrong. He didn't do it right. And I explain this in a long article on my blog, link in the show notes. But I regard his mistakes as honest precisely because he let them tell against his own King James only view. He actually concluded that the New King James Version was superior to the King James in something like 65% of the places he checked in Romans. I was totally shocked when I read this. He ultimately decided he couldn't recommend the New King James Version, but that didn't erase his willingness to praise it. I really appreciated this. It made me feel that here was someone I could have a conversation with. Here was someone who was honest. One of the reasons that I know KJV-Onlyism is wrong is that its proponents so rarely admit any weak points. They are 100% completely right, and I am 100% completely wrong. Not a single one of my list of false friends in the King James is legitimate. Not even one poses even the slightest difficulty to the average KJV-only 3-year-old. I am always being told, I heard it yesterday from a leading King James onlyist, that their kids can understand the King James just fine, or that no one in their country church has any problem whatsoever with the Elizabethan English of the King James. So when, as with Surratt, and as with recent commentator Jason Kelty from Cleveland, when I see staunch KJV onlyists giving me an inch, I am willing to go 100 miles with them. Kelty said in a recent comment, "Dead words and false friends. Yeah, I get it. I've often wondered if there should be a modern translation that solely changes these kinds of things, but it would be such a huge task. I couldn't imagine trying to tackle it myself." There was humility and respect in his comment. There was honesty. Why don't I see that more often? We all make mistakes. I think I know. We are finite creatures and fallen ones. But just a tiny bit of humility will go a long way in protecting us from actual dishonesty. I have now told out all the reasons why I am right. Conscript some reasons why you think I'm wrong in the comments if you must. I do my best to listen to honest disagreement.